For my lesson in EDU 606, I taught a small group of second graders about suffixes. The small group had a few students with learning disabilities. Two of the students had a specific learning disability, and one of the students also had a developmental delay. It was a big help to the classroom teacher that I taught this lesson before the week started, because suffixes happen to be the target skill for the week, and these students really need some pre-teaching before they can understand skills with the rest of the class to make sure that they're not falling behind. The objective of my lesson was for students to be able to separate a suffix from a base word, and in order to do that, they really had to recognize the suffix in order to decode the word. And the other objective was for them to understand how a suffix changes the meaning of a word. These objectives correspond with the English Language Arts Common Core Standard under the strand for Reading Foundational Skills for Literacy number 2.3D. And that Common Core Standard is to decode words with common prefixes and suffixes. It's a very common second grade standard that all children need to know. There were 6 questions that I thought about after I evaluated my own lesson, and I'm going to go over them with you guys now. So number 1 was, did the lesson unfold as you had planned? If not, what changed and why? If yes, what was the number 1 aspect of the lesson that went well? My lesson did unfold exactly as I planned, which I was really excited about. The best thing about the lesson was that the students kept asking the key question that I wanted them to understand at the end of the lesson. They kept saying, well, which part's the suffix and which part's the base word? And I was like, I'm so glad that you're asking that question, because that's what you're supposed to learn in this lesson. So they really kept asking until they understood the concept. They had great curiosity and engagement throughout the lesson. And the second question was actually, did the students learn what you intended them to learn? And that was absolutely yes. They were so engaged, and they kept asking questions so much that they definitely learned what they were supposed to learn. And I know this because at the end of the lesson, I gave each student a packet, and they had to highlight one part of the word in one color, the base word, and the suffix in a second color, so 2 colors, to show that they knew which part of the word was which. And then I collected these packets and made a spreadsheet of which words they seemed to understand and which words they didn't. And almost every student in my group got 100% on highlighting these words. They knew what they were doing, and they were exceeding the competent mark after we went through this lesson for 45 minutes. The third question on my list is to ask about the students' engagement during the lesson. My students were so engaged during the lesson, and I had a variety of activities for them to do, and that really kept them engaged. One of the things that I had were magnets for the students on little whiteboards, magnetic whiteboards, and I would say, let's think about a person that gardens. Is it a garden full, a garden lee, a garden or, a gardener? And they'd have to take the suffix with it, which was on a certain magnet, and write the word and take the magnet and put it with it. And they thought that was really fun because it was hands-on and they could pick them up. They were also really engaged when we got the highlighters out. They loved being able to see that. Using a multisensory approach definitely kept them engaged. I also told them they'd be able to play a game at the end of the lesson if we could just get through it on the iPads. And this definitely kept them engaged, because every time they'd go off task, I would remind them, we're not going to be able to play the game if you can't get through the lesson. And they loved the game, which was great, but they also learned a lot from the game. It was taking words with suffixes and finding 3 words with the same suffix in them. And some of the ones were the ones we went over, and then we even got into words that we hadn't gone over, and they were still able to meet the target skill, which was really exciting that they learned that in this lesson. The next question was, if I taught the lesson again, what would I change and why? One of the things I would change is I would probably let the group be a little more collaborative. I was really in charge and really directing everything that the students did in this lesson, and they might have gained a little bit more if I had said, why don't you turn to each other and talk about that and figure it out together as a group? And I might not have let them ask questions as many times as I should have throughout the lesson to check for understanding. They did understand it, but they kept asking me rather than me asking them. So I definitely need to slow down when I'm teaching my lessons so that they'll understand the point and that they'll have time to think about it, because these students did have learning disabilities, so I might have gone a little bit too fast, and that's why they kept asking the questions. I definitely want the students to be more in charge of the lesson than I let them be in the past, so that they can have a say in what they're doing. So that's something I would change. And the last question is, what have I learned about my strengths and weaknesses? I learned that my strengths include organizational and planning skills because I was so ready for this lesson. I had everything there, and I was prepared to answer all of the questions that the students asked me during the lesson. I had really mastered the content before I taught it to my students. I did a great job of keeping the students engaged and coming up with activities that they would enjoy. I managed their behaviors in a proactive way. Every time a side conversation started, I would say, guys, stop, you're off topic. We have to get back on task. And they would, because they knew there was a game at the end of the lesson that kind of kept their attention throughout the entire lesson. And some of my weaknesses might include letting kids have more say in their lesson. I have to remember that I don't always have to have the kids listening to me. They can listen to each other, and when kids teach and explain things to each other, they're actually learning more, because if you can explain a topic, you understand the topic thoroughly yourself. So something that I would love to do to increase this skill of mine is to look at a Readers Writers Workshop script. My FPF actually recommended this to me. In the Readers and Writers Workshops, the teachers read a script, and it has the students turn to each other all the time and say, well, what do you think about that? And I really want to see how one of these works, so I might actually head on over to a local elementary school to observe one of these lessons, since we don't have Readers Writers Workshop in my district that I'm currently teaching in. So overall, my lesson went really well, and I can't wait to do more. Thank you.